The year is 1666. London is a city of narrow, winding streets. The houses are made of wood and plaster, and they are packed tightly together. Many buildings have jetties, which are upper floors that lean out over the street below. This means the houses almost touch at the top, creating dark alleys. It is a city full of flammable materials. Workshops belonging to blacksmiths, brewers and bakers are scattered everywhere. Their businesses use fire every single day. London in 1666 was a tinderbox, a disaster just waiting for a spark, and on a warm night in September that spark was lit. It all began in the early hours of Sunday, the 2nd of September. The place was Pudding Lane, at a bakery owned by a man named Thomas Fariner. He was the king's baker, so he was well known in the area. Late that night, after a busy day of baking, he had gone to bed. He believed he had put out all the fires in his oven, but it seems a spark remained. This tiny glowing ember found its way to a nearby pile of firewood. Quietly at first, the wood began to smolder. No one was awake to see the first small flames flicker to life. The fire started small, but it would soon grow into a monster. The Fariner family was woken up not by an alarm, but by thick, choking smoke. The fire had already taken hold of the bottom floor of their house. The main staircase was blocked by flames, making escape impossible that way. Thinking quickly, they climbed out of an upstairs window and scrambled across the rooftops to the safety of a neighbor's house. Everyone got out alive except for the family's maid. She was too frightened to cross the gap between the roofs. Tragically, she became the first victim of the Great Fire. The fire was now free to spread from the bakery to the adjoining buildings. At first, nobody seemed too worried. Small fires were a common occurrence in 17th century London. The Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, was woken up and brought to see the fire. He was not impressed. Famously, he said that a woman might piss it out and went back to bed. This was a terrible mistake. The summer had been long, hot and dry, making the wooden buildings even more flammable than usual. A strong easterly wind began to blow, fanning the flames and pushing the fire from one timber-framed house to the next. The small fire on Pudding Lane was about to become a city-destroying inferno. By Sunday morning, the fire was no longer a local problem. The strong wind was helping it leap across streets, and the closely built houses provided an endless supply of fuel. People started to panic. They tried to save their belongings, loading them onto carts or carrying them down to the River Thames. The streets became jammed with people and their possessions, making it very difficult for anyone to fight the fire. The official firefighting methods of the time were not very effective. They used small hand pumps that squirted a little water, and long hooks to pull down burning buildings. But the fire was too big and too hot for these simple tools to make any difference. The fire raged for 4 long days and nights. It moved west through the city, consuming everything in its path. The sound was terrifying. People reported hearing a deafening roar like a storm and seeing the sky glow red for miles around. The heat was so intense that it melted the lead on the roof of St. Paul's Cathedral, sending it pouring down into the streets like a river of silver. Famous buildings which had stood for hundreds of years were completely destroyed. The Royal Exchange, the city's centre of commerce, was turned into a smoking ruin. The fire seemed unstoppable, a hungry beast devouring London block by block. King Charles II and his brother James, Duke of York, took charge of the firefighting efforts. They rode through the streets, organising fire posts and encouraging the exhausted workers. They realised that the only way to stop the fire was to create fire breaks. This meant destroying buildings in the fire's path to starve it of fuel. At first, they used the old method of pulling houses down with hooks, but this was too slow. The king then gave a controversial order: use gunpowder to blow up entire rows of houses. This was a drastic and dangerous measure, but it was the only thing that could work against such a powerful fire. Finally, on Wednesday the 5th of September, the plan began to work. The gunpowder explosions created large gaps that the fire could not cross. At the same time, the strong easterly wind finally died down. The fire had run out of fuel and a clear path forward. By Thursday, it was mostly under control, although smaller fires continued to smoulder for days. The great monster had been tamed. But as the smoke cleared, the true scale of the devastation was revealed. London, the greatest city in England, was a blackened, smoking ruin. The people stood in shock, looking at what was left of their homes and their lives. In the aftermath of the fire, as Londoners surveyed the wreckage of their city, a question began to form in their minds. How could this have happened? For many, the idea of a simple accident in a bakery seemed too small a cause for such a colossal disaster. Suspicion and fear began to spread like the fire itself. People needed someone to blame, and they started looking for culprits. England was at war with the Dutch and the French at the time, so foreigners were an easy target. Rumours flew around that the fire was a deliberate act of terrorism, a Catholic plot to destroy the Protestant city of London. These fears were not just idle gossip, they led to violence in the streets. Any person who looked or sounded foreign was at risk of being attacked by angry mobs. People were desperate for a villain, someone to hold responsible for their suffering. A French watchmaker named Robert Hubert was arrested. He confessed to starting the fire deliberately. He claimed he was a spy working for the Pope. His story changed several times, and it was full of contradictions. For example, he said he had started the fire at a different location, and he wasn't even in London when the fire began, but people wanted a scapegoat, and Hubert fit the bill perfectly. The official investigation looked into these claims of arson. The king and his council listened to witness after witness. Many told wild stories of seeing foreigners throwing fireballs into houses. These stories were fueled by the political tensions of the time. Anti-Catholic sentiment was very high in England. Many believed that Catholics wanted to overthrow the Protestant king, and that the fire was the first step in their plan. The confession of Robert Hubert, however flawed, seemed to confirm their worst fears. It was a simple and convenient explanation for a horrifying event that was otherwise difficult to comprehend. Despite the lack of any real evidence, Robert Hubert was found guilty. He was hanged on the 27th of October, 1666. It was only later that the truth came out. The captain of the ship Hubert had travelled on confirmed that the Frenchman had not even arrived in London until 2 days after the fire had started. He was an innocent and likely mentally unwell man who had been executed to satisfy the public's demand for justice. The search for a conspiracy provided a focus for people's anger and grief, but it was based on fear and prejudice rather than solid facts. The truth, it seemed, was much more ordinary. While the conspiracy theories were dramatic, the evidence pointing to an accident at the bakery is much stronger. Thomas Fariner, the baker, admitted that his oven had still been hot when he went to bed. This is the most straightforward explanation. The conditions in London at the time did the rest. The dry summer, the strong wind, and the wooden buildings created the perfect environment for a fire to spread rapidly. There was no need for a secret plot or foreign agents. The city itself was the problem. The fire started in a baker's oven, a completely normal and everyday event that had catastrophic consequences. The fire caused immense destruction. Although the official death toll was surprisingly low, with only a handful of people recorded as dying, it is likely that many more perished and were never identified. The material damage was staggering. The fire destroyed over 13,000 houses, 87 churches, and many important public buildings. The iconic St. Paul's Cathedral was left a shell. An estimated 100,000 people were made homeless, losing everything they owned. They were forced to live in makeshift camps in the fields outside the city walls, facing an uncertain future. The economic heart of England had been burned out. However, out of the ashes of the old city, a new London began to rise. The disaster provided a unique opportunity to rebuild the city in a better and safer way. King Charles II encouraged new plans for the city. Architects like Sir Christopher Wren proposed wide, straight streets and grand public squares. While not all of these ambitious plans were realized, the new London was a significant improvement. Houses were now required to be built from brick and stone, not wood. The streets were made wider and access to the river was improved. These changes made the city much safer from fire in the future. Today, almost all historians agree that the Great Fire of London was a tragic accident, not a deliberate act of arson. The story of Robert Hubert is seen as a sad example of how fear and prejudice can lead to injustice. The fire was caused by a combination of human error, a baker not properly extinguishing his oven, and the unfortunate conditions of a dry, windy night in a city built of wood. While the fire was a terrible disaster for the people who lived through it, its legacy was a new, safer and more modern London. the foundations of the city we see today. The monument, a tall column near Pudding Lane, was built to remember the fire, a permanent reminder of the catastrophe that reshaped the capital.